Welcome to Grounded Live, everybody, with John Tester and Maritza Giorgio. We have a lot to get to today, but I need to ask you, did you get all your alfalfa baled or what?
Got the alfalfa baled, yeah, and now we're plowing down some peas for my fertilizer for next year, and then we'll start swathing grass hay in about 3-4 days if it
Hold
doesn't.
on. Okay. Plowing down peas, like last year's crop that's dried up and stuff. Is that what you mean?
No, the stuff that I planted this spring is about I don't know, a foot and a half tall, and we're plowing that down for fertilizer for next year's crop.
Well, can't you eat the peas?
No, they're field peas. You can eat them, but they're
Ah,
little. They're a little bitter. They're
oh,
if you were gonna harvest them, they're more for cattle feed.
okay. I'm learning so much. I didn't see a video of you doing this
Oh
yesterday,
shit!
so
I keep forgetting. I got to do that. Maybe I'll do it today. Okay.
okay,
Okay. Back,
solid.
back by popular demand. Me plowing down
Okay.
trees. Okay.
Give the people what they want. All right.
I'll
So
do it.
today we have Miles Taylor joining us, and you might know him better as Anonymous because that was the pen name he used multiple times. He was the man behind the 2018 op-ed that caused a lot of drama inside the first Trump administration. Now he's the focus of a presidential order basically calling for his investigation, accusing him of treason, and he's fighting back. So we are going to talk to him. This is a man who was a lifelong Republican up until 2022, and we'll chat with him here in a few moments. We'll bring him on live.
It'll be good.
It'll be
It'll be good.
good.
I look forward to the conversation to find out why the president thought he was treasonous. It'll be
Well,
good.
it's when that happened, when that came out, I was working for the local NBC affiliate. And I mean, I remember everyone was trying to guess who is this? What is this? And my girlfriend who I worked with, she and I made this like graphic and it looked like a Clue board game. Like who could it be? Miss Peacock. And we had, all the pictures of Trump administration officials of like who could Anonymous be. So I really look forward to talking to him. Okay, we have some headlines. Overnight, Paramount, the CBS parent company, agreed to pay $16 million in a lawsuit settlement with President Donald Trump. The original lawsuit asked for $20 billion in damages after Trump accused the network of deceptively editing an interview with Kamala Harris on 60 Minutes. So some context here, though. Paramount is trying to finalize an $8 billion merger with Skydance Media. Now, they say the settlement is not related to that or the FCC approval process.
Well, there's a couple things that come to my mind. First of all, it shows what happens when you have huge companies that have their fingers in a lot of different issues. They become beholding to different agencies if you don't have a government that is run in a way where there aren't any winners and losers. They're just calling balls and strikes. That's not how this president likes it. We've seen it time and time again. We saw it by the way, just recently with the parliamentarian when he said, I don't like what she's doing. Why? Because she was interpreting the law as intended, not with Democrats or Republicans in mind. And President Trump wants it to be always interpreted with Republicans in mind. So CBS pays 16 million bucks. Now it was 20 billion, so you could say, geez, they got off for not much, but $16 million is a lot of damn money. And to admit fault when I do not believe there was any fault there, they're just relaying the story. Shows you how scared uh, that mainstream media is of this president. Probably rightfully so, but I don't think you solve a problem by paying hush money. That's all, and that's what I think this is.
Well, we saw the same thing with ABC too over that George
Yep.
Stephanopoulos
Yeah. No,
thing.
it's not the
And
first one. Probably won't be the last either.
yeah, it's something to watch, especially from someone who worked in for one of the networks for mainstream media. Okay, so the legislation formerly known as the
But
Big Beautiful.
by the way, I just want to stop for a second here. I know that the company probably looked at this and said it's easier just to pay the 16 million than accrue a bunch of legal fees. That is not how you. That's not how you apply the law. Um, when I was on many different boards throughout my lifetime, oftentimes the lawyers would come in and say, just pay the settlement. You guys were right, but pay the settlement because it's going to cost you more money to fight it than what the settlement would be. And I always said, fight it. fight it or they'll be back again and they'll have their head in the trough again trying to get more money out of us. It's crazy. It's just crazy. If you don't fight these things and stop it where it holds, it's going to happen again and again and again and again. Go ahead.
Okay, so the legislation formerly known as the Big Beautiful Bill on its way back to the House. I hear that Speaker Mike Johnson's pushing for a vote possibly today. We have several House Freedom Caucus members expressing concerns, but in the Senate, your former colleague Lisa Murkowski facing a lot of criticism for her vote in favor of this. It literally came down to a tie that was broken by the vice president, and Senator Angus King, the independent from Maine, was heard yelling to his colleagues, "Shame on you guys! That was the most disgusting vote I've ever seen in my life."
Well, Angus was right. And Lisa Murkowski is one of my favorite people in the United States Senate. She's she's a real person that really does look after Alaska. Unfortunately, I think she made a bad decision. You never want to be the decider on these votes, never. And she was not once but twice. And secondly, this is really a bad bill. And the truth is Angus knows that. I think most of the folks that voted for it know it's a bad bill, but they're intimidated. And they don't want to move forward. I mean, look, it was Lisa Murkowski a few months ago that said she was concerned about safety if she bucked the administration. Um, I don't know why
Yeah.
she did what she did, but I will tell you that um, it's unfortunate because she's really. I mean this, and everybody out there is probably going to say, "Well, she voted for the damn bill, and she could have stopped it." But Lisa's a decent human being, and I just don't know why she did what she did. I'll attribute to bad staffing. How's that? And because the truth is that she should have never been put in this position. And I think that it's bad for Susan, bad for somebody who I think is a serious legislator. But
Well,
it
we
is what
uh,
it is,
we
man. I mean, you make bad votes. Occasionally that happens, but man, there was plenty of time to think this through, and it wasn't. So
and
there
our
you go.
invitation to Senator Murkowski remains to come on and chat about that and talk about that. I
Yeah,
think
I
she'll
texted
probably
her. I've texted her and others a few times, but they don't get back to me, which is fine. I understand that they're
they're
busy.
kind of busy. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
kind of busy.
Yep.
Okay, so the president visited yesterday what's being dubbed Alligator Alcatraz. This is the detention center for undocumented people taken by ICE. The president joked that if they escape, they'll be eaten by alligators or snakes. Some people are likening this to internment camps, or I've heard worse, even concentration camps. And we see about 8% of the migrants that have been arrested so far have actually been convicted of violent crimes.
What percent? What was that percent again? I want to hear that again. 8.
8%.
One more percent than I got think.
One more.
Okay. All right. Um, Look, I think the real question here is where we headed, and is this how we want to see tax dollars spent? Not unlike spending tax dollars on a prison in El Salvador. I mean, these guys are supposed to be fiscally conservatives, and this doesn't look very fiscally conservative to me. And second of all, 92% of the people they're picking up are not violent criminals. Are you kidding me? Really? That's the best they can do? This is
Well,
crazy.
and
This is
this
crazy.
is
And then the other question is who's next after those guys? What other group is going to be determined as a enemy of the state and moved into these camps? That's crazy.
this facility alone will cost $450 million a year to be reimbursed by FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. And we see communities, I mean, how many times have I reported on communities hit by wildfires, hurricanes, you name it, natural disasters that are still waiting for FEMA
Yeah,
reimbursement?
and I don't see how this is in FEMA's thing. This is on Border Protection or ICE, and ICE's budget in the big bullshit bill got increased by 300%. Is what I'm told. Yet they don't have the money to do this. By the way, this is all taxpayer money, though. And why are we spending it on this? Why aren't we spending it on something that has a return to the economy? That's all. That's all I got to say. And that's not to say that we shouldn't be kicking out the bad guys, the criminals, and all that. But only 8% of the folks that are picked up are in that group. That means 92% of the are law-abiding, tax-paying citizens.
Well, and the administration says, well, they're all criminals because they're here illegally or they're undocumented, but that's not a felony. That's not a felony to be here, as an undocumented immigrant.
Yeah. Look. But I mean, yeah. I mean, look. The whole conversation goes on and on and on about
Yeah.
what role these folks play, and the fact that we're going to give amnesty to people who are farm workers and service workers and those, so the rules don't apply everybody across the board. And it's why, because they're bad rules, just like the big beautiful bullshit bill was full of a lot of bad stuff. And that's why, quite frankly, places like Alaska and the other top 10 states that had a lot of fraud in the SNAP program and get a pass. And so it's crazy. That's my phone.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. All right.
Sorry. Okay, so the president is also threatening Zohran Mamdani, the winner of the New York City mayoral primary for the Democratic Party. He falsely claimed that Mamdani is here illegally. He's not. He's a naturalized citizen. And then the president threatened to arrest him if he blocks immigration arrests.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, the president makes a lot of claims, and I would say a fair amount of the time they're not true. I mean, he said the big beautiful bill was great. It is great for people making over $400,000 a year, but not so great for the folks under that, and not so great for people who need health care, not so great for people who need food security. And so, consequently, him saying that Mandami is here illegally is incorrect, and he needs to be held accountable.
Okay, the White House confirmed it stopped weapons from being sent to Ukraine, including PAC-3 Patriots, which are basically ballistic missile defense systems. Missiles themselves, artillery rounds, and more. A spokesperson said it was a decision made to put America's interests first.
Or Russia's interests first. Let's be honest. This is about Putin and Putin's relationship with the president. And Putin has already made the claims are already there. They want to take back a sovereign nation that was sovereign from Russia, and we're going to set that wants to be democratic, and we're going to step back and say that's just fine. That's not just fine, and it's unfortunate, and it's a mistake, and it's a mistake that we will end up regretting down the line. This isn't about America first. This is about Russia first.
Yeah, there are a lot of people really upset about that. Mike McFaul being one of them, a former ambassador to Russia, and he's been outspoken about this. And so we will continue to follow this. I mean, those are just some of the headlines. Like we said, I mean, every episode of this that we do, there are so many to hit on, and so many of these, though, I look forward to chatting with Miles Taylor about. I've invited him, so we'll kind of tap dance until he joins our call. But he has a lot of insight here. He worked for DHS. He worked in counterterrorism. He worked in national security. So,
yeah, it'll be cool to visit with him. I don't know if he's ever in front of committees in the Senate or not. I don't remember him if he was, but
okay.
it could have been. Look at this. Look at this.
Hey, there he is.
Shall receive.
Hey, Miles. Welcome to Grounded.
Hi, friends. It's great to be here. I don't feel grounded today, so I'm hoping you might just help me get into that mode.
We'll get your feet firmly planted on the ground, but I just want to start out by saying you look very professional.
Yes. Yeah.
Senator, you're the only one who's ever accused me of that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So Miles Taylor enters the chat here, a national security expert. You actually worked as chief of staff at one point for the Department of Homeland Security in the first Trump administration, and we have so many things we want to talk to you about. Thanks for being with us here. But, I want to ask some more broad questions with you about kind of the resistance or the pushback within Trump 1.0. But I want to start with your take on some recent headlines, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's dive right in. Nothing's off limits.
Oh, I like that. Okay, I'm going to send it over to the senator to start us off because I know he's got.
You've already proven that you're grounded, man. You got it down. Nothing's off limits.
Nothing's off limits.
God, that's given Maritza way too much latitude.
That's right.
So, look, the president thinks you're treasonous. Why?
I mean, look. In short, Donald Trump thinks that personal criticism is subversive. And we can, I'm sure, all three of us laugh at how absurd that is. That, a president would think that someone who personally criticized him is therefore guilty of the highest crime, basically, in the U.S. Code, treason, punishable by death. But it's also real and it's happening. And worse, he's taking accusations of treason against his political enemies and using the force of government to try to bring those things into effect. But in short, Senator, it's because I had served in the first Trump administration, did not like what I saw, and felt like it was pretty important for someone to sound the alarm from within the administration and say, no, y'all aren't just crazy out there. They're telling you you have Trump derangement syndrome and everything's fine, but everything is not fine because we weren't able to operate the federal government the way that the taxpayers would expect because we were so focused on one man's constantly illegal whims.
Yeah, man, there's about 400 questions that went through my head when you
Go
were going
ahead.
down
Go ahead.
this line. Now, I mean, so let me try to pull this out of my my thought process. Did you release any classified information?
Absolutely never.
Yeah. So what you talked or wrote about was just the goings on inside the agency, right?
Correct.
And the agency was DHS, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And so what did you see? Try to refresh our memory on what you saw that was
Yeah, like what was the
a little
first thing?
suspect.
What was the first thing that made you go, "Oh, we need to do something"?
Yeah, I mean, the honest answer is look. The very first thing is that I didn't know Donald Trump. I don't pretend to be social friends with him, but also a lot of his cabinet did not know him, and so a lot of the cabinet secretaries who came in were sort of meeting the president for the first time as well, and trying to understand him. And the first time I met him is I had gone up during the transition to Trump Tower in New York City. And we had this meeting with Donald Trump that was supposed to be about his national security transition, right? Here are all the really, really weighty issues that you're going to take over once you get inaugurated. So this is late 2015 late 2016 after he's won the election. And I go up there with a number of members of Congress. I was working on Capitol Hill at the time when John Boehner was speaker and then Paul Ryan. And it was clear in that meeting that Donald Trump was so completely unfocused. Go ahead, Senator.
So let me ask you, were you part of DHS in the previous administration? Were you a regular employee or were you a political appointee?
A political appointee. So I had served in the Bush administration as a political at the White House, then DHS, then went to Capitol Hill in the intervening years. And then when Trump came back in, initially I had no interest or intention of going in. Yes, I'm a lifelong Republican, but we all saw who the guy was. And he was, number 16 of 16 candidates in that election that I had hoped would win the presidency, right? He was dead last in terms of who I had hoped would win because of his brash attitude. And also, I didn't think he was a conservative. I didn't think he was a Republican, and that was sort of demonstrated by his background. But anyway, I volunteered to go up to Trump Tower and, help coach the new president on the issues that he's going to be taking over. And it was clear from that very first meeting how unfocused he was. He didn't even care that we were there to talk about national security issues. He picked up this giant map of all the counties that he had won across the country, where those counties were shaded in red, and he said, "Look at this. Look at how beautiful it is. All of this sea of red." And that's all he could focus on. And, maybe you give someone a mulligan because that first meeting is right after their victory. He's riding very high. But eventually I take a job in the administration working for John Kelly, who was picked to be Homeland Security Secretary. And the reason I went to work for Kelly and said no to jobs at the White House is because it was clear Kelly knew this was going to be very turbulent and he was going to approach this with a lot of integrity. And it turned out that I shouldn't have given Donald Trump a mulligan in those first meetings because that's how he was in every meeting. Totally distracted, completely unfocused, unable to synthesize information, unable to read. And, that went from a novelty to a national security concern pretty goddamn quick because you're taking issues of life and death in front of the president and you don't want him futzing around, talking about politics, taking phone calls, tweeting. You want his head to be in the game, and his head was never in the game.
So Maritza's going to go here in a second. So do you have any reason to think that it's different in this term as far as his interest as to what's really happening as far as everything? I don't care if you're talking about illegal immigration or you're talking about uh, tornadoes and floods or whatever. Do you think there's any reason to think that it's different in this term?
Uh, yes, but not in the way that you would hope. It's different in that it's worse because when we would go into those meetings in the Oval with the president, and let's take floods for instance, something that you're familiar with, floods and tornadoes, and Senator, you had to deal with DHS a lot when there were natural disasters and border issues and all of those things. We would take those into the president, and he would cook up stupid ideas. But then you had a room full of people willing to say, Mr. President, here's why that's a bad idea, or here's why that's illegal, and walk him off of it. But let me give you a concrete example. I remember we had a hurricane coming in towards the East Coast. It was bearing down on the East Coast, and we're sitting in the Oval Office briefing the president on the storm track. And we tell him, Mr. President, you need to declare that this is an emergency and go on television and tell people they need to evacuate immediately because people are not taking this seriously. And the president said, I was watching TV and there was a guy in a grocery store parking lot with a Make America Great Again hat on. And he said he was going to hunker down. And that's what Trump supporters do. They're tough. They're going to hunker down. And we thought, shit, the president's mindset here is to tell people to hunker down when this hurricane is going to kill people. And so, to her credit, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who was then press secretary, chimes in and says, Mr. President, if you tell MAGA supporters to hunker down, we may not have as many supporters in the Carolinas as we want come 2020 because this is a dangerous storm. He said, you know what? You're right, Sarah. We should tell them to get to safety. We should tell them to get to safety. I mean, that's absurd. That's absurd that it took the president a political talking point to get him to convince people to go and evacuate to safety. But those types of things would happen all the time. In that meeting, there's a much longer story there where we ended up spending a half an hour because the president wanted to talk about flying a helicopter down to see the wreckage afterwards. He would get very excited to see the wreckage after a disaster. And he wasted the whole meeting. We needed to talk about life-saving measures, and instead the president wanted to pick which helicopter he was going to fly to go view the wreckage. Those sorts of things, again, while seemingly comical, have a real-world impact if you can't get the president to focus on life and death decisions.
Last question, then cheers, Maritza. So many. So do you know who, and I didn't think I was going to have any questions for this interview, so this is different. Oh. So who's the Sarah Huckabee Sanders in the administration now?
Well, I'm not even sure I would say that that was necessarily Sarah's disposition with regularity. In that particular moment, she was quite helpful. I think there are none, Senator. I think there are none. And
so who's running the show then? Who's somebody's got to be calling the shots.
Donald Trump is, and I think Stephen Miller. I think those are the two most powerful figures in the administration, are Donald Trump and Stephen Miller, without exception. And look, if you're a MAGA voter, you would hear that and say, well, hell yeah. I mean, he's the president. He should be calling the shots. Okay, but my rejoinder to you would be, but the guy who's calling the shots with regularity wants to do things that are unconstitutional and that will set a precedent that eventually some president will come in that those MAGA voters don't like and will use those same tactics to do some very, very dangerous things. As Trump goes and tries to unilaterally delete agencies he doesn't like, I'd say back to MAGA voters, all right, well, then let's say a far left president comes in and starts deleting parts of the Pentagon, starts deleting parts of DHS, starts deleting the Border Patrol. That's not how government works. And so I think it's very dangerous that I don't just mean dangerous that the president's calling the shots, but that he's calling the shots without anyone advising him on the legality of what he's doing. And people can brush me off. Simply look at his record with the courts right now as evidence that he's done a flood of illegal and unconstitutional things because the courts keep ruling against him. And those were things he wanted to do in term one. And that love or hate people like me who were in that administration, we kept a lot of those at bay. Now the floodgates are open.
Okay, Miles, I have so many questions. I'm just going to spitball them at you. Did you vote for him?
I did. Well, which election?
Oh, sorry, 2016. 2016.
No.
No. Okay. Did you vote for him in any election? That leads to my next question.
I did not. I wrote in that election.
Okay. So, when you talk about all of this, I mean, I know you say he's calling the shots. Do you have contacts still within? Like, I don't want to out anybody or We're on a huge Uh-oh.
Hold on. We should all take that call. We have to know.
Who is it? Who is it? Murkowski?
We have to know.
I'll be back. You take your conversation.
Okay.
Oh.
So
Now we really want to know.
Now we really want to know. But are you, without spurring like a huge internal investigation, which I know is already happening anyway, looking for leaks, I mean, are there people within the administration that you're in contact with right now, like guiding them through this?
Well, I think not as many as you would hope. Very few. I mean, look, I'll say this, and let me address the thing that you referenced head on, Maritza, which is that this second Trump administration is so focused on rooting out potential truth tellers and dissenters and people who would tell the president maybe his ideas aren't the best ideas, that they are firing people who even have an association with previous dissenters. So, as an example, a few weeks ago, the White House fired a senior DHS official because they found a photograph of him at my wedding. And then, to make it worse, they leaked that story to the Washington Post to humiliate that person and said, guy who went to Anonymous's wedding has been fired from the administration. That is intended to send a message. Not only don't dissent against the president inside the administration, don't even associate with previous dissenters. And so I think as a consequence, Maritza, that you've seen very, very few people standing up to the president from the administration. Certainly in public, you're not seeing any of that. You're seeing total fealty on cable news from his lieutenants. But what I worry about is inside the administration, the Oval Office has become an echo chamber because no one wants to challenge him.
I saw that. I read about that. I mean, is that what they said? Were those like when they issued that termination? Was that the reasoning?
Correct.
So isn't there a lawsuit there? I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but isn't there a lawsuit for wrongful termination there?
I would hope so, but unfortunately, the individual, because there's so much fear that has been created by this administration, the individual who was let go posted afterwards how grateful he was to work in the Trump administration and for Donald Trump and hopes to be able to serve him again. That is stunning to me, that you would be fired, humiliated by the president, and still feel like you have to say nice things about him because they could make your life worse. I mean, in fact, I want to give you guys one more example along those lines, because I have been spending many years now talking about how if Donald Trump won re-election, it would be a revenge machine. And certainly that is bearing out. But even I have been surprised at the level of social fear that's been created, right? The punishment of law firms and universities and individuals has created a ton of social fear. And I'll give you one direct example. I was supposed to do a fundraiser for my legal defense fund in a major U.S. city a couple weeks ago. And I got a phone call that the original venue that was going to host it said they had to back out. And I said to the individual, that's unfortunate. I mean, did they find out that I have been very opposed to the president? Is it political? And they said, no, they're very supportive of you. The restaurant's really scared that they'll be targeted if they hold a fundraiser for you. Okay. So we find another venue. The other venue, we hire this caterer to, serve soft drinks for the fundraiser. Caterer backs out. And I get a phone call and they say the caterer cannot participate in the event. And I said, is it political? And my contact said, no, they're supportive. They're worried, though, that their employees might get deported if they're seen having supported an event like this event. I said, my gosh, this just keeps going. So we found another place. We had it all set up. A week before the event, the journalist in that city who was going to moderate the conversation among me and others, that journalist backed out of the event and said, the news organization had already approved it and said, even though the organization approved it, we're worried that this could become a contentious issue. I've got to back out. And we ended up canceling the event. That is the level of social fear. We couldn't even get fucking people to serve Diet Cokes at a legal defense fundraiser for someone opposed to the president because there's so much social fear about standing up against this guy.
Do you think that was on their own decision, or do you think there was pressure? Do you think there were phone calls and emails or pressure?
I think very unlikely there was pressure, although that's the first time anyone suggested that to me. It's certainly possible. I think much more likely is people are just self-censoring. And I see this a lot with technology CEOs. Before this most recent executive order against me from the president, I spent most of my time advising major technology companies in this country, AI companies, quantum computing, robotics, autonomy. And, almost universally, you've got these major tech CEOs who are very, very opposed to Donald Trump. And they think he's dangerous. They think he's reckless. But then in public, you see some of these same CEOs making multi-million-dollar donations to his inaugural fund because they're scared. They're very, very scared that if they don't saddle up to him, instead they're going to be punished by him. And we've never seen anything quite like that. And as evidence of how their fear is, I don't want to say justified, but is perhaps justified in their own minds, is look at the lengths to which they're willing to go. I mean, we've now seen the idea of people's citizenship being stripped now become a pretty common weapon. I think just in the past week, we've seen 3 news stories of the administration and anonymous sources threatening they might revoke the citizenship of people ranging from Elon Musk, to other figures for opposing the president. I can't think of any time in American history we've had the White House using people's naturalized citizenship as a bludgeon to scare them. And so when you think of just the tech sector, you got a lot of people who are naturalized U.S. citizens that work in tech. That's about the scariest thing you can lord over them is, hi, you enjoy your time in the United States? We can strip you of it. It's terrifying to me.
So this is a question that should be the last question we ask you, but since I'm an impatient person, I'm going to ask you right now. Where would you agree this is not sustainable, right?
No, and I also think it's going to get vastly worse.
So where does it end?
There's a couple places where this could end, but I'll pick 2. One, it ends with the republic in irreparable condition. And by that, I don't mean we are in a trenches and muskets civil war, but if our institutions are so violated by someone who's keen on abusing power the way that Donald Trump is, at the end of 3.5 years, we might not be able to repair that damage. And more concretely, let me say, that would be if the president starts to more actively defy the courts. Let's say the Supreme Court makes a decision, Donald Trump doesn't like it, he defies it. It's very hard for us to come back from those things, not because the institutions themselves cannot recover, but because we, the populace, it will take a whole generation to recover because we will fully lose trust in things like the judiciary and the executive if those decisions aren't respected. So that's one outcome, is we could be in a place of irreparable damage to the republic. But another outcome could be that popular mobilization against this president ends up creating additional checks around him. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say he continues to go after more of his enemies, not just people like me and my family, but, American tech company CEOs and, other folks who end up essentially goading him to make so blatantly unconstitutional decisions that he gets challenged and that there is more popular support against him. I think that's one of our best hopes. I talked yesterday to Charlie Sykes, and he cited the famous Ben Franklin quote, "If we don't hang together, we'll hang separately." And I love Charlie, and it's the perfect moment to resuscitate Franklin's words because in truth, that is the only real check we have on any wayward president, is that popular mobilization, people standing together so they can't be picked off one by one.
Well, you talked about the folks within the administration that aren't doing their jobs, and I could say the same thing about Congress not doing their jobs. I think that this big, beautiful bullshit bill that just passed yesterday is a prime example of Congress bowing to what the president wants rather than doing the right thing. And there might be 10 people in the Senate that think this is a good bill, and I mean that, but the other 90 know this is a bunch of crap. And people within the administration have to know it's a bunch of crap. And my question to both parties are, why would you work in an organization that is fundamentally has no ability to make decisions? They have no ability to uphold the law. They have no ability to follow through with any kind of policies whatsoever because, quite frankly, as you've already pointed out, the big guy's going to do what the big guy does.
Well, and Senator, to take it even further, I know you have this conversation. I know you both have this conversation all the time, like I do. The number of people who know better that are in the House or the Senate or the administration have dwindled significantly. At least the ones that are willing to even say that to you in private. Now we know a lot of them, like you just said, that 90% of those senators know better, but they won't even whisper it in private anymore because people are so scared. I mean, those would-be dissenters in the Republican Party that you encountered, you worked with every day, and you would have conversations with them over lunch and at the end of hearings where they would say, "This guy's a lunatic, but don't worry, we're going to do this or that, and we're going to get past it." Even those people are gone because they're self-selecting out of politics or they've been eviscerated from the Republican Party. And so we're left with a very, 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 very timid, I don't even know if you could call it opposition within the GOP, but a very timid group of people that we would count on to be a check on this president. That are terrified to exercise the potential for that check, and we saw it with the big beautiful bill and a number of senators who I would have hoped had done the right thing, who instead capitulated.
So Miles, in April, so all of this, you published that first op-ed in 2018, and
Yep.
then a couple of years later, you published the book. 7 years after after that first op-ed was written here, you're still a target. In April, the president signed a memorandum that ordered an investigation into you for treason. So I'm just wondering, your lawyers then filed a formal complaint with the DOJ and DHS with their inspectors general, basically asking them to investigate if this is a violation of the law or constitutional protections. So, where do we go from here on that? You said that you think this is a test case, but also we have this presidential immunity ruling from the Supreme Court that's 1 year and 1 day old. How does that play into this?
Yeah, look, I'll say it's very bad. And almost every time I talk about this, I give the attendant caveat that I'm not looking for folks to play the violin for me or show sympathy, but I'm not going to shut up about this because it is truly unprecedented. After this happened in April, legal scholars from around the country came to me and said, this is the first time in American history that a president has ordered an investigation into a critic by name for First Amendment protected speech. This has never happened. And you could like Miles Taylor or not give a shit about Miles Taylor and still be very alarmed by this. Why? Because this is the only thing stopping the president of the United States from doing that to you, to the senator, to anyone else is a pen. Is he's now proven that he can just write up an order to investigate anyone he wants, and the only thing holding him back is how many signatures he can put on various pieces of paper in a given day. Now, it is blatantly unconstitutional, the order, and that's why we're fighting it. That's why we're very confident we will prevail. But that can take years in the courts and then in the judicial system. And in the meantime, the president wields an extraordinary amount of power to intimidate individuals like he's done law firms and institutions by saying, I will have you investigated if you oppose me. And the impacts for us have been extraordinary. It's very costly. It cost me my job. It's cost us our security. It's cost us, frankly, everything just to have that order issued. He hasn't even brought fabricated charges yet. All he's done is sign the order, and it's been destructive. And as you noted, his aides came out afterwards and said, this is meant to set an example. They want to scare people. And we faced a decision. My wife and I talked about it. We could have laid low and said, let's just hope this blows over and they don't carry forward with the order. But then it makes it a lot easier for them to do this to other people. And so credit to my wife. Hannah said, no, fuck that. We're coming forward. We're talking about this. We will not shut up. We will not let this happen. This is not the country that we live in. And so we won't. And it's why I'm sitting here with you guys right now.
Appreciate you being on too, by the way. I did a little fellowship with the University of Chicago Institute of Politics, and one of the other fellows was a dissident from Russia. And one of the things she said, as she talked about Putin and she talked about Trump and she talked about the parallels, quite frankly, believe it or not, she talked about the parallels, is this is not a time to sit on your hands. This is not a time to be quiet. This is not a time to run and hide. And so I think you're right. I think your wife, as always, women are always smarter than the guys. I think your wife was absolutely right.
That's a fact. And actually, Senator, I'm so glad that you mentioned Russian dissidents. I'm going to read you something from. I don't think any of us keep journals anymore, but occasionally when I have a thought I don't want to lose, I just write it down in the Notes app, which is where all things happen inside of our lives these days. And I just want to read you something because the other day I started reading Alexei Navalny's book. He's the Russian dissident who was killed by Vladimir Putin. And someone had recommended it to me. It's called Patriot. It's a fantastic book. And I literally wrote down these words after I finished the book. I said, besides Hannah, that's the name of my wife, the closest thing I think I've had to a best friend through all of this is, oddly enough, Alexei Navalny, the Russian dissident. He has made me laugh, and he has given me much to think about, and he has buoyed me with his assurances that my freedom can never truly be taken from me because they can never take away my thoughts, try as they might to censor them. Of course, Alexei is dead. They killed him for exactly that, thinking and saying the wrong thing. So perhaps he's the dangerous sort of friend they tell you to avoid. Still, his book Patriot has been one of the greatest sources of comfort since this all began. I shall reread it. I never would have expected, Senator, that we would be comparing what we are going through in the United States to the experience dissidents in autocratic republics, but those similarities are unavoidable, and they should be a blaring red light to all citizens.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I'm sitting here, and with the exception of a handful of neighbors, they're all uh, Trump supporters, and they just don't see any of this stuff as being a big problem. They see him as enforcing the law and kicking people out who don't have to be here, and they don't see they don't see the First Amendment challenges. They don't see him not obeying the courts being a problem. At least if they do, they're sure shit not talking about it. And so it makes me wonder what happens. Look, this big bullshit bill that passed is going to have some impacts on people's quality of life. It's going to make poor people poorer. It's going to have food security is going to be tougher. It's going to be rural hospitals could close in the most red areas of this country. But yet none of that seems to matter. And then you've got folks inside the administration. You talked about General Kelly being the Department of Homeland Security, and he was a chief of staff for President Trump too later on. This guy was a good dude. I remember when he came in our office and up for confirmation for DHS, he had no idea who Donald Trump was at that moment in time. He had no idea. And yet he went in, and now I believe he's on the list with Mattis and all the others as being a bad person, right?
He is indeed. And I have to tell you, Senator, I don't know if you've heard from him since. I'll just relay. He was also, Kelly was also a big fan of yours as just a straight talking truth teller. And, he could work across the aisle very easily. And, he knew that he had an honest broker on the Democratic side in you. But I think that those people are, they're not even few and far between anymore. They are just non-existent in the second Trump administration, and that should be concerning to all of us. So the one thing I want to note about, I think your point is well taken, that there are just so many people, millions of Americans who just don't see what's happening as a problem. I also think those people are not our audience. I think the audience, the people that we need to reach, are the people who know that what's happening is wrong, but are looking the other way. Because that population is also tens of millions of people, and they are the majority makers. Because right now, I would say in the United States, maybe by a thin margin, that the opposition is still the minority. And to have the opposition to this wayward president become the majority, we have to get those people who are looking the other way to start to look in the right direction. And it's very, very scary for them to do that. And this goes back to the Ben Franklin quote. They're really worried that if they stick their heads out there, they'll be targeted, whether it's in their own communities or by the president of the United States. And the only way to get them to do that is to show them that the water's warm on the other side, that there's a lot of us who see what's happening and see that it's wrong, that a lifelong Republican like me sits with a lifelong Democrat like you and talks about this issue in the same way. They can come be a part of that conversation, and they don't have to be branded on their forehead with it for the rest of their lives, but they can do the right thing right now and get us through. And I think that's the target audience for us.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think you're absolutely right. But I would add one thing to that. When you do away with things like freedom of speech and power of the pen, due process, and the list is law, that impacts everybody in this country. At some point in time, everybody. I don't care if you're the most ardent MAGA supporter or if you're left of Bernie Sanders. It's going to impact you. It's going to impact you at some point in time. We talked about a alligator prison in goddamn Florida. That could have impacts on everybody, not just immigrants, but everybody, you know? And so I agree with you. The target audience is different, but the truth is the impacts a constitution is not followed has on everybody, Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian, the list goes on, is 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 just, I mean, it's there. It's there's just no doubt about it.
So you talk about people looking the other way. We've talked about Senator Murkowski a couple times this episode, but she did say, I don't know, a few weeks back or maybe a couple months back now, that people are scared. Do you think, I mean, we know that Republicans, if they dissent or they go against the president, that they're threatened with a primary and campaign money, financing a campaign against them. Do you think that they're also scared to have their name appear in a memorandum like yours did? Do you think
Oh
they're
yeah.
also scared of that kind of thing, or worse?
Very much. And people probably get tired of hearing me use this statistic. But I mean, during the time that the senator was in Congress, we went from an average of 1,000 death threats a year against members of Congress to, by the time you left, sir, it was 10,000 death threats a year. So there was a tenfold increase in death threats to members of Congress. And, we've heard from folks, of course, like Liz Cheney about the impact that had on her family, but also on her colleagues, because she had a number of people come to her and say, I don't want this to happen to me. And it's very real. I mean, as we speak, as we are talking, I've got emails here in my inbox from lawyers about MAGA stalkers we have in other states that are threatening us and that we have to go take legal action against because they're making violent threats against members of my family. Like, this is something you have to contend with when you enter this situation. And members of Congress know that. In fact, this last Congress, there's a couple of people, I won't say them by name, I'll let them poke their heads out when they decide that they have the courage, but a number of Republicans who resigned because they couldn't take it anymore in Trump's Washington. And one of them in particular, I sat down with for a coffee, and he said, look, I got two, kids, and I just can't deal with this anymore. I think his home had been swatted and some other things had happened because he didn't vote the right way on a bill. He was like, I'm not going to put up with that shit anymore. I'm just going to leave. And so the intimidation works. And my friend Alex Vindman, who had worked at the NSC under Trump, people remember him from the first Trump impeachment because he talked about this corrupt phone call Trump had with Ukraine. Alex says that all the time, just very simply, intimidation works. And, he of course has been a lifelong scholar of the former Soviet Union and Russia and Ukraine. And, when Alex used to talk about those words, it was in that context of how, intimidation was a tactic of Soviet leaders to really bring the population to heel. And now we are seeing that done pretty extensively here in our own country. And it's working all the way up to members of Congress that we would hope would do the right thing and defy that intimidation. But a lot of them aren't defying it. They are complying with it.
So we're seeing round 2 now of the Elon v. Trump battle, social media battle. Presidents making threats, like you already mentioned, Miles, about deporting him or investigating him. Elon's vowing to create a third party if and when this mega bill is signed into law. So I want your just kind of your take on the feud and these two. I mean, I won't label them these two very powerful people with lots of money, but also this third party, because I know you've efforted that. You started a third party.
I dabbled. It's just kind of like the people who said, I smoked weed once in college. I was like, I played with third party politics a little bit and got burned. I'll tell you about that in a second. The feud, look, here's my unpopular opinion. Elon might save us. Okay, what do I mean by that? I don't have high hopes of that, but I do think if Elon continues his opposition to Donald Trump and starts to take political actions against him, and if Donald Trump follows through on his threats against Elon Musk, Donald Trump will be engaging in behavior that is definitionally corrupt and very likely illegal. In other words, if he intends to cancel federal contracts to private companies on the basis of political speech, he's done something that's against the law. And actually, Trump is going to have a very hard time now, I think, canceling contracts against Elon's companies because he's laid the predicate that his reason for doing so is his opposition to Elon Musk's First Amendment protected speech and political activity. So why does that mean Elon might save us? Well, if Donald Trump starts doing those things, using the same revenge tools he's used against people like me, Elon has a lot more resources than Miles does. And I think he stands a better chance of going and bringing the hammer down in the courts against Trump's misuse of federal power. That could be good for everyone, ironically, for Elon to go win some of those cases and to try to narrow the scope of things that the White House is able to do to get revenge against people. But we'll see. I do think it's what caused Elon to go quiet earlier, a few weeks ago, is the worry that the Trump administration could pull the plug on all of his companies. And Elon may still win in the courts one day, but he may not have the companies, right? I mean, that's the dilemma is you can go fight the righteous fight, but in the meantime, Trump and the administration could do extraordinary damage to him. So that's point number one. Point number two on third parties, look, after the first Trump administration, I teamed up with a group of about 200 former Republicans to try to go create a reform faction within the GOP. And we failed as people like me and Adam Kinzinger and others. We failed catastrophically. Our whole project of creating this universe of rational Republican organizations to try to swing the pendulum back was a failure, total and complete failure. We were not successful. Then a number of us flirted with the idea of teaming up with disaffected Democrats to form a third party and to try to go challenge especially MAGA candidates in their primaries. And so I merged my organization with Andrew Yang's. He runs something called the Forward Party. I am very hopeful that there will be more competition in American politics. But it was clear to me in that experiment that there's an almost insurmountable challenge there. Now, that said, I think strategically, if someone like Musk does what Andrew had talked about doing and goes and runs third-party candidates in deep red districts in MAGA primaries, it could have a very, very real effect because they could go defeat some of these candidates and they could make it harder for the Republican Party to win in the general election in some of those races. So tactically, it may work. Strategically, I think like I said, there's a very high hill to climb for third parties to be successful. I eventually hope we see a proliferation of parties in the United States, but I think that's a long way out.
But do we think that an Elon third party would look that much different than MAGA?
I think that remains to be seen. For him to be successful, he's going to have to do coalition campaigning. That is the only way a third party will ever be successful in the future of the United States, is there has to be a relatively diverse ideological coalition if it wants to be successful at winning elections. If it just wants to play the role of spoiler, then it can pick a very narrow ideological path. If Elon wants his America Party to only focus on cutting the federal government down to the bone budget-wise and the debt, they can probably go win a bunch of primaries on the Republican side, but they probably won't win general election races. They're going to need to appeal to a wider segment of the population.
Senator, do you have a question? Because I have two more I want to get to before we let him go.
You go ahead, and then I'll ask one at the end. Okay, if you let me do that, please.
Of course, yeah. Of course.
See, this is what a coalition looks like right here. Yeah, I mean, you guys are just demonstrating it for folks. Yeah. Great cooperation.
Well, I'm going to, before you go, I would just say, I long for the day when the Republican Party gets back to conservatism, family values, those kind of things. Right now, that, and the big, beautiful bill is a prime example. You have tax breaks to the uber rich and increase our debt by $5 trillion and kick people off of healthcare and foods. I mean, really? I mean, it didn't have to be that way. But you look, I mean, when I first got in politics, it was great to talk about whether we were going to spend money and what we were going to spend it on and have those debates. That's not what's going on now. In fact, there is no debate right now because Congress is AWOL. Go ahead, Maritza.
Okay. So, Miles, you said something in an interview with Politico not too long ago. It stopped me in my tracks. You said, especially when we talk about threats against people like yourself, journalists stripping citizenship of people who are naturalized. You said, quote, "My even bigger worry is about the president turning the Department of Homeland Security into a much bigger political weapon beyond immigration. After 9/11, we built a very sophisticated counterterrorism apparatus in DHS, one that in the wrong hands could be abused and turned into a domestic counterterrorism apparatus to target political enemies." Can you break that down for us?
Well, I'm actually going to point to someone else in this conversation. The senator is someone who, for a number of years, flagged concerns about potential violations of civil liberties by a Department of Homeland Security that was unchecked. And I will confess to, for many years, confess to being one of those people on the Republican side who said, chill out, guys. DHS is not going to be used as a political weapon. We're not going to have an autocratic president come in and try and turn it into the East German Stasi or the Gestapo. That's just not going to happen. We live in America. This is a free country. And the checks that we have are making sure that we elect good leaders. I could not have been more wrong about that, because now we do have a president whose stated intent is retribution and wants to use the powers of the federal government to exact retribution. And those safeguards, those civil liberties protections that we should have put in place post 9/11 in somewhere like the Department of Homeland Security, are so weak and in some cases non-existent. And there were great bills. There were great bills out there to try to firm up the oversight and the protections of this giant domestic security agency that were never passed. And now we are suffering the consequences. What could that look like? It could get very scary. And there are very few things preventing the president and his administration from turning DHS into a domestic security apparatus that's going after his political opposition. I'll give you an example. Members of Congress coming back into the United States from congressional delegations overseas. President unilaterally could have them sent to secondary screening, search their pocket litter, search their phones, search their computers. And then incidentally, if they stumble upon evidence of a crime, I don't know, someone's got their taxes on there, they did it the wrong way, someone said something that they shouldn't have, then they can start to use that information against people. But it's not just border searches. It goes far beyond that. And I've said to folks in the past few days that my real worry right now is that some of the more sophisticated counterterrorism and national security powers that the president has will start to get turned on the political opposition. Spy powers, warrantless surveillance, those things that sound like George Orwell novels. It's very possible for this administration to bubble wrap their decisions in legalese and start to monitor the opposition, go after them, add people to terrorist watch lists. And you're starting to see the early inklings of that. Early in this administration, when the president designated Venezuelan gangs as transnational terrorist organizations, in doing that, he made it easier for anyone who incidentally crosses paths with one of those human smuggling organizations to get added to the terrorist watch list. So what does that mean? Well, you're not too many hops away from just saying people who are doing legal aid at the border to try to help migrants come across the country could be said by DHS to be aiding and abetting a terrorist organization. Then they get added to the terrorist watch list, and then they're monitored wherever they go, and there's potential ways to bring charges against them for providing material support to a foreign terrorist organization. This could all escalate very, very rapidly, and again, I think the protections are woefully insufficient.
Hey, Miles, because Maritza usually has about 15 or 20 more questions, we're going to let you off the hook. I just want to thank you very, very much for being a part of this podcast. Hope you feel more grounded now that you've been on it for the last 45 minutes.
I don't know. I don't know if it's the coffee or the conversation, but now I'm feeling amped.
You amped? You're amped up? All right.
Well, let's do it again. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Would love it. And let me say right back at both of you, this is a difficult environment for people to be going out there and telling the truth. You all do it with regularity. And I think I speak for your viewers and listeners that we're very grateful. So thank you for what you've been doing.
Well, back at you on that for sure. Thank you very much, Miles. Appreciate you being on.
Thank you, friends.
Miles. You're right, Senator. I did have a lot more questions, like a lot.
Always.
So
I think there's no doubt about it.
I know you have to hop off, but I have to ask you about your hat before we go.
Well, I'm kind of in a pizza mood today, and there's a pizza outfit in Missoula that makes some pretty damn good pizza. There's also one at Big Sandy that I wore yesterday called Pep's Bar and Cafe. It also
Peps.
makes really good pizza. I want to give dual creds, but I like this hat because it doesn't jump out and bite you. It's just kind of a regular hat. It's just got a little memo on it, and I kind of like that. I just
Listen, I'm a friend of Bob Marshall's, who owns Biga
yeah,
Pizza, and it is my go-to restaurant whenever I have friends in town. I love to go there. He's an amazing chef. He's been featured on all kinds of, cooking shows and whatever,
yeah.
and just a great guy. Great restaurant if you're in Missoula, Montana.
Well,
Uh,
you don't look like me without eating pizza. I'm just telling you. So it's part of the deal.
and it's my nickname. My whole life has been pizza because Maritza rhymes with pizza.
That's
So
right.
we love
I,
pizza around here.
I just want to say one thing about Miles. He said something that's absolutely correct. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, when I see something that isn't right, I'm not going to shut up. I'm going to keep talking. And I think that's 100% correct. And it's the way this country was set up. We have free speech, and it needs to stay that way. And yeah, if we lose that, we lose it all. So
This
that's it.
was an eye-opening conversation for sure, and we wanna
Yeah.
thank Miles again for being on with us. We wanna thank all of you who are with us live on Substack. We will be posting this, recording later and also on the podcast platforms. We have Senator Cory Booker next week.
The book.
This is going to be a fun conversation because you guys kinda have a bromance.
No, look, he's an All American football player from Stanford, and a a farmer outstanding in his field. Put the boots to him. No, it's book is one of my favorites. He's a cool dude. We had Pete Buttigieg on, who was incredible with messaging, one of the
Mm.
best. Booker's pretty damn good too. And so it's going to be fun to talk to him, to get the lay of the land, to find out how he went to the bathroom after standing on the floor for 25 hours doing that speech. I mean, that's the thing that
Oh,
amazes me. I don't,
so yeah.
it's amazing. I mean, yeah, well, we'll talk about all that stuff.
We'll talk about all of it and the bill and,
Yeah.
you name it. We'll talk about all of it. Thanks for joining us. You can find us, of course, here on Substack, Blue Sky, Instagram, YouTube. Shoot us an email anytime. This only works because of the support of people like you. We are so grateful. Thanks to Miles Taylor. Thanks to our friends at Pearl Jam for letting us use their music, and to all of you, our listeners and viewers. We'll talk soon.
Tally ho.